I see tight ends as a real breaking point. Like if you're, you got to decide when you're going to hop in. Are you going to hop in early? Are you going to try to play the game in the middle? Or are you going to try to play the game late? I think you got to have your targets set up for each of those scenarios. And
I
for
think
sure,
I think too, you're with the scoring the way it is, and it could even make sense. I think you do see a lot of teams and drafters go bully tight end. It's a way that you can differentiate yourself, which is extremely important in this draft. If you're new to it, even if you've played a year like myself, just trying to differentiate yourself, following your draft as it goes. Even if you have a plan, you do want to try to differentiate yourself from your league mates a little bit. It can play a big deal. And drafting two tight ends early is a way to do that. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. It's obviously league dependent, but for me personally, I will be getting a tight end in the first 3 rounds, as well as a quarterback because I draft at the 12 slot. So my strategy is to get at least one solid tight end in the first 2 rounds. Depending on how my draft falls, I would like to get one of the stud tight ends at the 12 at the turn. Might not happen. It might have to be the first 3 rounds.
I was willing to pull the trigger on Kelsey if he would have been available there at 112, but he went
Absolutely.
much earlier in my draft. But I wasn't willing to pull the trigger on Andrews or even my guy Pitts there at the 112 or the 2-1, so I went another direction, but it was pretty much I was open and willing to go tight in there at the 112, but it needed to be Kelsey for me to really feel like that was the slam dunk for me. I love Mark Andrews again. Love Kyle Pitts, obviously. Waller, Devontae Adams coming in there. Renfro still there. You can make a piece. Carr is really the best asset on their team as far as fantasy goes at this point with the weapons around him. So Waller didn't feel good. I do like Mark Andrews this year, and maybe I should have given him a little bit more consideration there. Kelsey's 1A and Andrews is 1B as far as I'm concerned, and then you get into my guy Pitts, and there's more question marks following those first two guys.
I was going to say that Kelsey's current ADP is sitting at 10.5. Going for 2.com, Jeff Lambert, the owner of the site over there, has ran about 50 mock drafts right now on Sleeper, and he's tracking the ADP for everybody. So this is some great data. So shout out to him. But Kelsey's current ADP right now is 10.5. So like you said, Dan, he's not really making it to the turn. Then you mentioned Justin Jefferson. His ADP right now is at 15. And then Mark Andrews is down at 18.7. So it's looking like you made the right move if you're tracking that stuff. But
how early would you take Kelsey?
Yeah, I think 8 or 9, somewhere in there. Maybe even a little earlier. I'd go 6 or 7. I think I'd consider him over even a JT or CMC potentially.
For sure.
But it's really just those top 5 or 6 quarterbacks that I would not want to take Kelsey ahead of. So really anywhere after that first really grouping of those top tier quarterbacks, you can slide Kelsey in there, like as I mentioned, even ahead of JT or CMC. We can pull up my draft board here in a minute, but you look down, I mean, there's running backs that I like going off the board in the 5th and even the 6th round. That's not the case at the tight end position. So again, getting that position that is thin. I mentioned there's 2 guys that I feel really great about, and yeah, there's a chunk of 2 or 3 behind them, and then another chunk of 2 or 3 behind them, and then it's wide open. And I think ultimately that if you don't get one of those top couple of guys, you are essentially punting the position. So, my draft, obviously how it went down, one guy locked up a lot of the top tight end options. And so the rest of us are going to kind of be scrambling, instead of just a couple of us having to really locate that late round tight end value. And there's a few of them this year. This is a great year for late tight ends. There's a bunch of them that have a shot, but at this point, we're all going to be doing it because one guy took those 4 tight ends in the first 5 rounds. So it's interesting, but I think tight end is definitely it's so condensed there that it feels like it can be a difference maker in this tournament.
So I just want to say, too, the guy that ended up winning last year, and it's important to note for people who are listening, like the general fan that might be in the Scott Fish Bowl for the first time, the last 2 winners have both been fans. But the guy that won last year, remember, is other quarterback. But he had Joe Burrow, Austin Eckler were two of his first 3 picks. The other one was a different quarterback in the first round. Up picking Cooper Kupp, and he got Mark Andrews in the 5th. So kind of maybe this value spot where you're looking at tight ends, maybe you don't want to pick one first 2 rounds. Maybe you're trying to find that tight end that's after like the top 2 rounds that falls. So maybe you're trying to find, essentially this year, you're trying to find this year's Mark Andrews. Maybe that ends up being like a George Kittle. Maybe it ends up being like a Darren Waller. Maybe that's the way you want to go. But there's lots of different ways you can shake this out. There's people that have had success drafting a tight end early, but then you're also assuming that tight end stays healthy the whole year, which a lot of these guys don't do at, this point in time. Kelsey's kind of like the one that does. And he's older at this point in time too. He's kind of the safest one that's on the board. But you can also go late tight end.
For me, being at the 12, I want one of Kelsey, Waller, Pitts, Andrews, or Kittle. That's just because of where I draft, but it's obviously going to be different for guys drafting in the top 6 picks, or so be it.
Is there anybody in like the rounds 4, 5, 6 range that you guys would take a tight end? Anybody that just like you're on?
TJ Hawkinson, I still like him.
That's where I'm at too, man.
The Lions have upgraded their offensive line. I also think Jared Goff's a great late quarterback for this draft. The Lions aren't going to put him in a position to throw a bunch of picks, which are, do hurt you. So I like the Lions. They've surrounded Goff with weapons, Hawkinson being one of them. And I think that's just the perfect example for that if you were to do that.
Also say, be careful of the middling tight end. We see this every single year in drafts. I'm not saying Hawkinson specifically, but guys like Mike Gesicki, Dallas Goedert, these guys that have more competition in their room, they're probably not going to earn as many targets. Those type of guys that are in the kind of middle, just be weary of that, because we see time in and time out, year after year, those guys, like in your regular league, they're going like 8th round, 9th round every year. That's kind of like the tight end dead zone.
Yeah, Hawkinson's ADP currently is round 7, so that's pretty good. I'd steal him there.
What's the ADP for Kittle and Waller this year? Because I think those would be the 2 interesting ones.
Those are 2 guys that you might be interested in, like 3rd or 4th, Craig?
If they like fall to the 4th or 5th round, I'd be interested. And I think that's kind of where you get into that Mark Andrews territory last year. And I think Mark Andrews has a great chance to do similar to what he did last year. I don't think the Ravens are going to throw the ball quite as much. But obviously, there's no Marquise Brown there, and he had over 140 targets last year. All those aren't going to go to Rashad Bateman. As much as people on Twitter want to believe that's going to happen, it's not.
Yes, let's go.
In my draft, Kittle went at 4.6, Waller went at 4.8, and Hawkinson went at 4.10.
Yeah, I don't mind that value. And then if you're in a draft that like they slide, maybe one of those guys just gets a run on another position, it kicks them down another half a round. That's pretty good value.
Yeah, I think that's going to be pretty consistent, that most of those guys will be available either late 3rd or early-ish 4th, somewhere in the 4th. I think that next tier of those tight ends will be there, which is tight end 4, tight end 5, and tight end 6.